I mean, weren't you just live tonight?
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah. So what have you been working? What'd you work on today, for instance?
Let's see. Today I worked on, they had some lawmakers back here in Jefferson City to work on how we need to change the funding formula for higher education. So there was a hearing that lasted a couple of hours and had to put that together. But there's also some severe weather that's going through Missouri right now. So my story has been moved a
Um,
handful of times to be able to respond accordingly to our weather hits for our meteorologist.
so where is Jefferson City?
Jefferson City is in the middle of the state. It's pretty much exactly 2 hours to St. Louis, 2 hours to Kansas City, 3 hours or so to Branson, and about 2.5 hours to go north and be in Iowa. We're in the middle of the state. I always explain to people that Jefferson City is about 30 miles south of Columbia, which everybody knows because that's where the University of Missouri is.
Right. And then do you only work in Missouri?
I do have some of my stories air on News Nation in Chicago, but my stations that I specifically work for are all across the state: Springfield, Joplin, St. Louis, Kansas City. I think I might have hit them all. I feel like I'm missing a couple, but yeah, I work for all across the state of Missouri. But my parent company is Nexstar, so a lot of times they take my stuff depending on what the topic is and air it on News Nation in Chicago.
Hmm. Okay. So when was it? What kind of stories do they usually air on News Nation? Do you know?
Yeah, it has. Last year, it was a ton about legislation here in Missouri to prohibit transgender minors from receiving medical care. It also happened a lot the year before that when it had to do with abortion. Missouri was one of the first states, and Missouri was the first state in the country to ban abortion following the overturning of Roe versus Wade. This year, it had to do with something called Initiative Petition, IP for short, which sounds like a computer problem, but it's really not.
Right.
It's to their goal was to make it harder for Missouri voters to amend the state's constitution because later this year in November there is a 90% chance that abortion is going to be on the ballot. So Republicans specifically did not want it to be easy for voters in Missouri to overturn that. So those are kind of the big hitting stories that News Nation picks up on, and I've also been following for a couple of years now a Mizzou student who was hazed pretty significantly that left him disabled, can't see, can't walk, can't talk anymore because he had to drink a liter of vodka. And they didn't take him to the hospital when he went unresponsive. So that's been a big national story that I've also worked with News Nation on. I think I've been following that since 2021. So big court case for that just happened like 3 weeks ago. So
How,
yeah.
how do you keep track of all these stories? Like how many stories do you work on per day?
Normally it's about a story a day, but I should say that during the legislative session, which in Missouri happens from January to May, those are days where it's two, three, four stories a day, depending on what comes up in the legislature. But it's a lot of, I think I get asked a lot, like, how do you remember all this?
Yeah.
Well, I want you to know in Missouri during the legislature, and I'm sure this happens all over this country, is that they seem to kind of, once session gets started in January, they seem to just keep going back over the same legislation. They might change one or two words. So it makes it easy to remember kind of the big things. But I am required to turn a story every day. Normally, I am turning that story for the 5 and 6 o'clock news. There are some times, like today, my story in Kansas City is not going to air until the 10 o'clock news. Luckily, I don't have to be live for it. I record a look live and just so it looks like I'm actually doing the story live. But it just depends on the day. And with so many different stations, um, everything's different every day. So, which is what I really, really enjoy about my job, honestly.
Yeah, that's what's so exciting about journalism is it's literally different every day. Even if you only work in the newsroom, it's still different every single day because things are happening, constantly happening.
Exactly. I always wonder how my parents have desk jobs. They go in
Yeah.
every day and do the same thing. And I love that every single day is different, no matter the sun comes up, the sun comes down. I'm not doing the same thing I did the day before. And it's my job to tell a different story, different sound bites, different people to interview. And that's something that I truly enjoy about my job.
And then, but with the other stories, back to the story about or back to the question about asking, following stories. You said you're following that story of that college student who
Mhm.
became disabled, and so how do you keep track of those stories? Do you have like a spreadsheet or something?
I do have a spreadsheet. I have a spreadsheet of court cases, honestly, that are pretty big in the state of Missouri, especially since I cover a lot of laws and legislation. What it is about at that point is keeping track of who is suing the state for what and when those court cases are and where they're at. I don't really do in this job as much as I've done in previous jobs when I was just a general assignment reporter and I used to just cover everyday stuff. I might keep track of one specific court case. This is all about the state getting sued and how laws are impacting that lawsuit. And so I think that my Excel sheet, I couldn't live without it. It's a Google sheet that I try really hard to check regularly on. In Missouri, we have something called CaseNet, where I can look up and see what exactly is happening in that case. Has there been a hearing schedule? So that's pretty nice, but no, I couldn't do it without an Excel sheet. That's for sure.
And so you said right now you're only covering the court, the state.
So things are different right now. So we're out of session when it comes to politics, but it is a big, big, big election year in the state of Missouri. We have term limits in the state of Missouri, so pretty much all seats are changing. The Senate is a little bit different. The senators schedule for when their term limits are up are like every other 4 years, and they try not to turn over the Missouri Senate as much as they do the House. Every 2 years, all 163 members in the Missouri House have to be either reelected or they're termed out. In the Senate, we lose about 12 of the 34 members, and they kind of just do that accordingly. But this year, we also have a governor's race, all the statewide offices. And unlike Illinois, where the governor runs with a lieutenant governor, the governor in Missouri does not even have to know the lieutenant governor. So it's truly every statewide office is super important this year. And because of term limits, we're losing our lieutenant governor, our governor, our secretary of state. So there's just a lot there. So this year, I would say that unlike years past, when we are in the month of June, I'm normally focusing on a lot of court cases, especially with how the state is involved. This year, though, I have to pay attention to a lot of election things, whether that be who is endorsing who, how I can get the response of big topics from each individual gubernatorial candidate. And I would say that that's my big thing this year is an election year. And even though, yes, we do have the presidential race later this year in the state of Missouri, that does not seem to be the topic of conversation. Missouri is a very, very red state. I would be shocked if either presidential candidate even takes a step in the state of Missouri before the November election. So it truly is about the local elections here in Missouri, which is keeping me super busy. And just kind of following up with this governor's final term. He's doing a handful of things. And now a big conversation in the state of Missouri is the Chiefs, the Kansas City Chiefs, possibly moving over the Kansas line because of some tax credits. And that's also playing a role in the governor's race later this year. So I would say my big thing this year is elections, with sprinkled in of a little bit of policy still, of what the current governor is going to sign into law within the next couple of weeks, and then a couple of court cases that still haven't finished for this year yet.
Well, do you decide on the stories or does an editor?
It is truly my decision. I was, I, when I wanted to become a journalist over 10 years ago, I always disliked how people said journalists are biased, or this journalist works for CNN, so they have to lean one way. This person works for NBC, they have to lean the other way. And especially with my job as a political reporter, I didn't want anybody to ever say that about Emily Manley. And so when I took this job 4 years ago, I remember sitting in at that time, my soon to be boss's office, and I said, I'm very interested in this job, but I'm not going to get told how to write my stories by anyone. I'm not going to be told that we can only air a Republican. I cannot be told that we're only airing a Democrat. That's not how this works. It's not my job to tell Missourians/Americans how to believe or what to believe. It's my job to make sure that I have a soundbite from both sides, let them tell their story, and let the viewer decide. So I always say that the day that my editor decides to tell me what story to do or who to interview when it comes to politics, that'll be the day that I might sign off the air for this job, because I just believe that, my editors are in St. Louis and Kansas City. They're not here in the capital city. So they don't know what goes in and day out. Now, I will say that when we're in session and we just have crazy amounts of stories coming out day in and day out, I do ask, what as a viewer is the most attractive to you? Is it the raising the minimum wage? Is it, possibly changing the time of day that you can sell cigarettes? All those types of things, just so I can kind of narrow my scope down a little bit, because there are days where I wish there were five of me. So it's me that picks my stories, and I send a note out every day to my group of news directors and say, this is what I'm covering. I'm offering live shots at 5 and 6. Let me know what you need. And if I ever do have a question about what is the most attractive to them, I do send that email out. But I'm a pretty big stickler about choosing my story, about writing my story, and about making sure that there is an ethical way of putting the same number of seconds of a Democrat on tape as there is a Republican, just because I believe that is so important for Missourians who get home from work that only get a minute 30 to decide or hear a news story. They get to be the ultimate decider, not me.
Well, I guess it depends where you work, because in some places the editor does assign stories because that's the workflow. And sometimes it doesn't come from sometimes they're sending reporters out to cover certain stories. So it depends.
Yeah, I will agree with that. I know that our news directors and assignment desk editors within the newsrooms in St. Louis and Kansas City do kind of assign those reporters, and they don't have to be political stories by any means. Heat related stories is not something that's going to be political necessarily. There was also we've had Juneteenth stories that they just need to go cover them. So I would say that there are some reporters, especially general assignment reporters, that fall under that umbrella of, yes, you're going to go out and do this story today. I think it's a little bit harder in this political arena to be able to do that, only because I am out here in the capital city all by myself with my bosses back in the metropolitan areas, and maybe might not know what's going on that particular day.
Hmm. Well, do you do the same story and then send the same story to all those outlets, or do you change it up?
No, it is the same story to all the outlets. There's 8 stations it airs on altogether, and people ask me that a lot, and I go, trust me, I am not turning 8 different stories a day. I would be beyond myself. So it's the same story. The only thing that's different is if you are a viewer at home and you're watching a live shot, you hear the person use the call letters at the end. So, reporting for our Missouri Capitol Bureau, I'm Emily Manley, Fox 2 News, which is my St. Louis station. My Springfield station, I would say, reporting for our Missouri Capitol Bureau, I'm Emily Manley, Ozarks First. So those change, but only in live shot stances. Other than that, when I record these so-called look lives, it's just I'm reporting for our Missouri Capitol Bureau, I'm Emily Manley. We keep it generic and simple. Number one, to help lessen my workload, but number two, it is the same story that airs all across the state. So, which is nice that I'm not required to change 8 different stories. I will admit that, especially during the legislative session, when there is legislation that is specifically aimed at Kansas City, like this year we had some Kansas City Police Department funding involvement in legislation, I will turn a story just for Kansas City, because that's not going to interest my viewers in St. Louis. So you do have to know kind of the realms and the boundaries of that a little bit. But my main story every single day is the same that airs all across all 8 stations.
Okay, how do you compress all that information and tell it in a concise way and a clear way when you're doing live shots?
I would say that my biggest thing is, and I used to be really good at this when I was a younger journalist. I feel like now I've gotten away from it. I used to take a notebook and just write my 4 big bullet points. If I could explain my story in 4 sentences, what would be the most important thing a viewer needs to know? I've gotten away from that now. Now, of course, I use my computer more and I just type out the big things, but I still think of it as an elevator speech. I've got a little bit different. I got a minute 15. I have a minute 15 to a minute 30 to tell a story. And so in that storyline, I have to make sure that number one, it makes sense. Number two, the viewer can understand it. And that can be really hard with legislation. And especially not only explaining it, but showing it, especially when it comes to television news. Video, B-roll, as we call it, can be really hard on certain court case stories, especially legislative stories. And so you got to come up with those 4 main bullet points, 5 main bullet points. And like I said, I used to write them down before my live shots all the time: who, what, when, where, why, how. And now I work at it a little bit differently on my computer with just my notes. And I would say that if I can answer those 4 or 5 questions in a sentence, I know that that's the most important thing. Just being able to break it down and being concise about it can be really tough. And there have been days where I've called my boss going, this is going to be a 5-minute piece. And they're like, well, sorry, it can't be. So good luck. Because you just can't take that amount of time up. But there are days that if I do have a more in-depth story, they will give me, maybe an extra 30 seconds to make sure that the viewer understands it. And I do find it interesting on days that I have those tough stories. My family lives in the St. Louis area on the Illinois side, and I'll be like, "Did that make sense to you guys? Did you guys understand that?" Just because I find it hard sometimes to explain what's actually happening, and I think that also helps me kind of find my niche when it comes to storytelling as well, because there is legislation that, let's talk about tort reform. Well, what the heck is tort reform?
Mm-hmm.
It has to do with lawyers and stuff that everyday Missourians aren't going to be concerned about. And it's so hard to explain. So that might be something I just write up for the web, not something for air, but it is something they can still find. When, other times we can look at raising the minimum wage or something in Missouri. That's easy to explain. So I would say that the best way for me to make sure that my things are concise, my stories are concise and they make sense and people understand them, is making sure that I can answer those 4 questions and in a sentence, and then I can kind of build my story from there.
Well, how did you learn how to speak without tripping up over your words in like a minute and a half?
That took some time. Thank goodness that there are days that I get to do some recordings, which help a lot. I always say, and when I took some time off from the broadcasting journalism field directly and went and taught it at Western Illinois University, I found the best way to explain to students is, if I take a breath or if I make a big mistake, it's really distracting to the viewer. But if I keep going, no one really notices at home. So I have crutch words, and my crutch words are always well and now. They're not they're not and, as I just said, but when you're going live on TV, it's always about trying to keep the viewer intact and there. And the moment that I stop talking, or the moment that I look down at my notebook and go, and that's distracting to the viewer. But if I can keep saying, well, today in court, blah, blah, blah. And now we know that the judge is expecting blah, blah, blah. So I find that those crutch words are so important, but I try not to make them or and, because that is distracting to the viewer. So I always told my students, find your crutch word and make sure that you have it in your head that you can always grab. So I would say I fall back really hard on now. Now this is happening, or now X, Y, and Z. And the person at home doesn't know that, but that's my thought. That's my one word where I can use to get back on track. I would also say that, those bullet points are super important. If I can remember those bullet points forward and backwards, I know that I can get through that live shot because I know my story. So if a producer is in my ear saying, we need you to stretch, we need you to go 5 seconds longer, I can pull something from one of those bullet points and just maybe expand on it a little bit. So I think knowing your story is a huge help to also getting through those live shots and those live reports because you are able to have a conversation. I also told my students that public speaking plays a big role in a lot of this. And what I mean by that is if you can stand in front of a group of people and get through a presentation, get through maybe just showing off something, a video, and getting through it and explaining to it, you can get in front of a camera and it's the same thing. Yeah, you don't have 200 eyes staring at you like you do on the other side of a camera, but it's all about making sure that you continue talking. The moment that you stop, you trip up, you forget where you're at, you look down at your notebook, that's the moment that you lose the viewer, or the viewer goes, oh, she wasn't prepared, she didn't know her story. So I would definitely say, in order for me to do a live shot, I gotta know my story backwards and forwards to the best ability that I can. B, use my crutch words when I absolutely need to use them, and don't be afraid to use them, because guess what? You are a human. And then third, I would say that at the end of the day, just keep going. It definitely feels worse on this side when I mess up compared to what the viewer sees at home. There are days when I feel like I butcher a live shot, and I'll text my mom and say, oh my gosh, how bad was that live shot? And she goes, I didn't notice anything. And I'm like, I paused for 5 seconds. How did you not notice anything? But it's definitely, and I go back and watch it and I'm like, oh, that really wasn't that bad. So it definitely feels worse on this end than what the viewer sees at home. So it's all about knowing your story, whether you love your story or you hate your story.
But sometimes it's hard to know a story when it's happening so quickly, especially if it's like
Yeah,
spot type of news.
I totally agree with that. And there are times that when I have to go live and they just voted on a piece of legislation 5 minutes ahead of time, I'm trying to make sure that I can give just those quick bullet points. I hate to say that I feel like I can butcher my way through, I can press through, but you know, give this those sharp, big points. And maybe that point is, if you're a general assignment reporter, you're like, police are still investigating at this time. We're still learning on the scene. Of course, when we find more information out, we'll pass it along to you. I do those same things when it's inside the state capitol. They just took a vote on this legislation. And I'll be honest, haven't had time to read this full 64-page document, but we do know that X, Y, and Z would happen or would change if this became law and signed by the governor. And I feel like all of us as reporters kind of, when we have our specific niche, we all kind of have that one thing we can fall back on. So if I have to fall back on, oh, the governor needs to sign this legislation for it to become law, I automatically know that that means the governor has to sign it by August 28th. But that's something that I've reported on for years. But I can always fall back on something if I have to stretch and get that time in. So I think that that's a really big difference too. And as a general assignment reporter, I remember being thrown out on shootings, house fires, crashes, and you literally got on the scene and you were live 30 seconds later and you didn't have a chance to talk to anyone.
Mm-hmm.
So you just had to explain the scene in front of you. You had to be able to explain, guess what, X, Y, and Z happened, and we're still learning more, but we can see that there are police on the scene. Sometimes it's just describing what you see that that gets you through that, oh my gosh, minute that I have to talk live on TV.
Yeah. So where were you a general assignment reporter?
So before I came to Mid-Missouri as a political reporter, I spent some time at the Illinois State Capitol, about a year. And then I was a producer at KMOV in St. Louis. So I worked the overnight shift. I was the morning producer for kind of floated between the 4 and the 5 a.m. So I was there. After that, I took a job down in Southern Illinois at WSIL, which is an interesting market because there are 3 television stations within that market, but none of them are next to each other. So, WSIL covers Southern Illinois. They're located just outside of Carbondale. Then the other station is Paducah, Kentucky. Okay, well, they're mostly covering Kentucky. And then the third station is in Cape Girardeau. So all of us are over an hour away from each other. So competition in that market was really strange and interesting, because if there was a big house fire down in the middle of Kentucky, the Illinois station wasn't going to go. The Kentucky station was going. If there was something that happened in Illinois, it was pretty much likely that the Missouri station wasn't coming over. But also because of how big that media market was, I had to learn Missouri law, Kentucky law. I might have said Kansas earlier. I cover some of Kansas now. Kentucky law, and then Illinois law. So, you know, as a general assignment reporter down there, it was really interesting to be able to cover 3 different states and make sure that you understood those 3 states. So I was a general assignment reporter down there. Then it was after that that I took some time off from actually being in the field and went and taught at Western Illinois University. I taught reporting and producing. And then that's when I got the call for this job. And I've been here 4 years now. So definitely at KMOV in St. Louis, I also was used as kind of a field producer in the sense. So definitely knew how to cover things live if we had to have a reporter out there, and was put on the scene for something like that as well.
Well, there are a couple questions I have, but one is, how long were you teaching at Western?
I only taught at Western a year. This is kind of an interesting story. My station in Southern Illinois, WSIL, I was there for a little bit over a year, and that's when our station got bought out. And I always saw Southern Illinois as a stepping stone for me. I didn't plan on spending 5 years there, 6 years there. It was that build that resume, build that real spot for me. And after that year of me being there and our station got bought out, we had a company come in and say, we're going to sign you for 3 more years. And there wasn't much of a raise there. I think it was like a 25-cent raise a year. It was crazy. And I was like, yeah, this isn't what I want to do. And I cannot believe this happened. I believe that, by all the stars aligning, that it worked out this way. That night, exactly that night, I went home from work, and I was stuck of, what am I going to do? I need a job by next week. And the former dean and former broadcasting director at Western Illinois University called me, and he knew that I went to grad school, and he was like, hey, Em, I'm in a pickle. School starts in 3 weeks, and I just had a teacher quit on me for a reporting and producing job. And would you be interested? Or would you know of someone that would? He didn't ask if I was interested because he knew I had a job. He asked if I knew someone that would be interested in the position. Anybody you went to grad school with, anybody that you know. And I said, I don't know anybody off that I went to grad school with, but it's really ironic that you call me. I said, I think I might be interested. And he goes, what? And I go, yeah, I got some news today at work, and I'm stuck in a predicament. I said, but I want you to be, I want to be honest with you. I'm not done being that everyday reporter, And he goes, no, you would be saving me, and I would be saving you.
Wow.
So I said, okay. He goes, can you get me through this year so I can go find someone to replace a replacement for good? And I said, I can do that. So I took the job at Western. The first day school started is the first day I was able to show up on campus. So it was kind of like just crazy how it all worked out sort of thing. Yeah, one of those crazy things that all worked out. So the goal was to only be there for a year. I ended up truly loving it, more than I ever thought I would. And I was conflicted of staying because I loved it. I love teaching the kids. I call them kids, but they're students. And, the reporting, the producing, us putting on a newscast 3 days a week. And I couldn't have said anything else better. I loved it.
Yeah, well, I'm sorry, what did you like? What did you like about it?
The light bulb. When they were reporting, and all of a sudden you'd be like, okay, but if you wrote that story this way, you could have added another soundbite instead of you talking so much. You could have added another soundbite to your story, which helped tells the viewer. And they'd be like, oh yeah, that makes sense. It was the light bulb. Or, let's talk difference between broadcast style writing and AP style writing. Because AP is how you got to get your story on the web. but you definitely can't talk AP when you're on TV because it'll take you forever to get through a story. And just the words of the little differences, if you made, you know, if you changed one or two words in a story, and you would see them go, that makes so much sense. And so just helping future journalists and helping them with their resume, they're real. Because I did work, my classes were 300 and 400 levels. So I had juniors and seniors. And,
Well, I was also saying,
you
like, you
know,
you had people who were motivated and they were invested.
exactly. And that's what I was going to say is, when they finally came to my class, they were already looking for jobs or internships for that summer. And they knew that they had to get those. And so they were turning in their work. They wanted the feedback. They wanted to better themselves as a journalist. And I loved it. Like I said, I really was conflicted of, do I stay? Do I go? Well, then again, I got another interesting phone call in February. So a month before COVID started. And it was from a producer that I had formerly worked with and said, hey, our station in St. Louis, along with 8 other stations across the state of Missouri, are starting this bureau at the Missouri State Capitol. It's never been done before, but I threw your name in the hat. I hope you
Wow.
are okay with that. And I was like, sure, I'll do an interview. So the next day, the news director called me and said, hi, Emily, I would like to set up an interview. So I went in for that interview on Lincoln's birthday, which ended up on a Wednesday in the middle of that week in February. The university was closed. So I made the trip down to St. Louis, did the interview. And I was really stuck because, a week later, they offered me the job to stay at Western for another year. And I really struggled with that because here's an opportunity to become the first bureau chief for this company in the state of Missouri and make it my own because there's nobody that's been here, or stay and help the students and continue at Western. And I was really stuck. And I ended up calling the director of broadcasting at Western Illinois University, who was there when I was there and who hired me as a teacher. And I knew that he would understand. He's always been the go-to person. And I remember going to his office and saying, I don't know what to do. I don't want to let you down. This has been a great year, but I have this opportunity. And he was the one that said and reminded me, you were the one that said you only wanted to do this for a year. You were the one that said you weren't done being a reporter yet. Are you done being a reporter? And I said, no. And he goes, you just gave me your answer. So having him being that super understanding person and saying, go do that job. Teaching will always be here, go do that job. And so that's how I started this job. I finished the school year in the middle of May. Of course, we had to finish online because it was COVID. And then I started this job at the end of May. So it's really interesting how it's all taken place. And I don't think teaching is done when it comes to reporting or producing or just journalism in general. I definitely see myself doing that in the future somehow. Just not sure exactly when that will be, but it's an interesting story of how I got here to mid-Missouri.
Yeah, because teaching is not limited to age. And in fact, if you're older and more experienced, it helps you, unlike other jobs where that doesn't help. For some reason, they don't want experience or age, older
Yeah,
people. So
but for this job, it's for teaching in this career field, it's perfect because then you have more that you can go off of. You can learn more scripts, how to write, how to exactly what you need to do. So definitely teaching will be in my future. I'm
sure.
just not sure when it will be, but I truly, truly did enjoy it.
Well, also another thing is that, the fact that you got a call from somebody saying, hey, you should apply for this job means that you've done well because for people to know, have, for you to have a reputation out there and for people to call you because of that, that's a big deal. It's rare.
Yeah, it was crazy. And it was all about, honestly, just because I worked with this producer before. We both worked at KMOV in St. Louis. He was a morning producer with me, and he knew that I got my master's degree in political affairs, or public affairs, excuse me. And so he just kind of knew that that's what I wanted to do. And so when he gave me the phone call, he was like, I don't know if you're looking for a job, but I threw your name in because you'd be perfect. And I was like, oh, okay.
That's
So
good.
that was really cool. And I am a true believer that in this industry, it is honestly all about who you know. For example, I was up in Wisconsin over the weekend, and there's a meteorologist that was on TV, and I'm like, oh, I knew her from St. Louis. And my in-laws who I was visiting were like, how do you know her? And I go, this business is so strange. I said, this business you would think is huge, but it's really not.
Mm.
It's really not. And so it's truly about all who you know.
Yeah, but then, but don't you also have to be able to do the job? Because there, if you're not really good at it, people are not going to want to work with you.
That's true. You can't just lollygag through this job because it's not something that's possible to just fly by the seat of your pants. This is not a job where if you don't touch a camera, you don't touch an editing software, a piece of editing software, that's not possible to do and do this job correctly. And this has also got to be a job where you have that go get 'em momentum. And it's because guess what? There have been times where I thought I was getting out of work at 5 o'clock. And then all of a sudden, legislature goes until 6, or all of a sudden there's a house fire and I'm working a double shift. So you have to be good about time management as well, and also being willing to be a team player. That's huge in this field.
Yeah, but I think that people don't want to deal with that because they're not being paid well. And so they think, wait, I'm going to work a double, but I'm not paid that much extra. I'm not paid much to begin with. And then they eventually quit because it's, what do you think about that?
I think that we have come to a really hard spot in this field of journalism. And I don't know how it changes. I've had a conversation with a lot of people that I graduated college with about this. And it's something that blows my mind. This about 2 months ago, I want to say, there was 30 of us that were really close to each other during college. And of the 30, I'm the only one left in the broadcasting industry. Everybody else has jumped ship. And they say, I wanted better hours. I wanted better pay. I wanted to have a normal life. And I get it. I truly get it. There are days I come home going, oh my gosh, why do I do this? Um, and the pay is not good. I'm not saying that I'm poverty level, but it's not what I'm seeing my friends that are working PR firms and communication firms, what they're making. And I don't know how or what is going to change this, because, I just went through a contract negotiation myself. And you kind of walk in there with, okay, this is going to be my year. I'm going to get that 5% raise, something crazy. And you negotiate and you negotiate. And at the end of the day, you don't end up with it. And it's really frustrating. You also hear of people that get bonuses at other jobs. And at this job, you're like, okay, yeah, I'm never going to get one of those. So I don't know what changes is in our industry going forward, but something will have to, because you do have journalist students that come out of school going, yeah, I went and did an interview and I found out that I'm making $30,000 a year. I'm going to the PR marketing firm and doing something better. And so pay is tough. It's a job that, and how I explained it to my students is, you're not going to get rich on doing this job. It's just, you're just not. And so you have to love what you do. You have to love, being that public servant, and explaining to the public what happened in a day, or what's wrong in the community, or how the community is going to fix it. And you have to just truly enjoy what you do, because this is a job where, if you don't have the heart for it, you're really going to struggle to be a good journalist. And I feel like now we're starting to hear more and more of reporters speak up about their wages. And so whether this means that these big companies that we all work for are going to step up to the plate, or you're just going to continue to lose people. My husband is a teacher at the University of Missouri in the journalism school, and they have a report every year of how many journalism students come through the program, and they're down significantly from where they just were 2 years ago. And my husband, who teaches journalism, was like, of my students this year, I had like 10 of them of the 40 say that they wanted absolutely nothing to do with journalism after they worked for the student newspaper, after they worked for the student TV station, just because they saw what they were going to pay in the crazy hours that they had to work. And so I don't know what changes, but I think that we're going to have to come to a point where I think some of these big companies are going to have to figure out that journalists do give an arm and a leg, and what's going to be done in the repayment system to make sure that the journalists are given exactly what they need.
Well,
I
there are a
don't know if I
couple.
answered your question there, but yeah, it was
Yeah,
a
well, no, I
roundabout
just
way.
yeah, but also there are a couple things. One is places unionize, and another answer, but I think a good solution is to pay off people's student loans.
Oh yeah. I mean,
And then so you
especially
sign them so they don't have a really good they may get that 30,000, but then the employer says you have to work for us for X amount of years or like 2 years, let's say, literally like Peace Corps or something. Not Peace Corps, but there are some situations where people get loans, well, for instance, medical school. And then
yeah.
in order to pay it off, they have to go to underserved areas and it's fine. So that's a possible solution.
Yeah, and whatever it takes, I know that would have been huge for me when
Yeah.
I got into the journalism field. That would have been really nice, but I hope that there is some sort of turnaround eventually. I feel like there has to be, because I just, you look at the surrounding stations, and I always dreamed of working in St. Louis because that's my hometown area. And they always said you could never get a job right out of college in St. Louis. You had to go make your mistakes in another market. You had to learn. Nothing wrong with that. I truly agree with that. And now the St. Louis stations are hiring these kids out of college. Number one, I hate to say it, they're cheap labor. But number two, they haven't had the chance to make their mistake, and here they are in St. Louis. So you see these companies trying to do everything to make it possible. Well, guess what? If the college graduates are seeing they can go to St. Louis, what happens to the station in the middle of Iowa or the station in the middle of Montana? They're eventually just going to fall to the wayside. So I think there's a bigger conversation around this whole topic, and I don't know the answer, but I would say that something's going to have to come of this sooner rather than
The answer
later.
is pay a percentage or either 100% or a large percentage of the student loan or have an
Yeah.
agreement with the schools. Well, another thing is that back in the day of journalism, usually people went to the school of the hard knocks. They did not go to universities. I mean, there are many more journalism programs that have emerged in the past several years. So
Oh,
that's part of it
absolutely.
too.
Yeah, that's a big difference, and I will say that, not to talk down on Mizzou by any means, but for example, they if the students that come out of there sometimes, because I run into a lot of them, they're like, oh, I went to the University of Missouri, so I can get a job anywhere. And I'm like, it's not necessarily how it always works. There are other locations than Mizzou, Syracuse, and Arizona State University, the Walter Cronkite schools. So yeah, there's definitely got to be something figured out that way.
Well, then another thing is that journalism is very unique. I think people forget that because I'm sure you heard this from people you know, when they leave the industry, they it's a very different workflow and there's not much intensity.
Oh
And
yeah.
so it's sort of also a adrenaline rush. I mean, a certain kind of person has to want to thrive in that kind of environment.
Yeah, I call it a drug. I call the politics that I cover a drug. Not that they are, not, but I get that adrenaline when I'm covering four different stories in the same day, but I know I have to be live at 5 and 6, and I still have to turn another story for the 10. And at the end of the day, I go, wow, that was a really cool day. So I think, that goes back to, you have to have your heart into this at the same time, because I can't just walk out of the Capitol at 5:30 and say, "All right, I did the one story for the day." But there were actually four big stories that came out of the Capitol today, and I have to make sure that they're told one way or another. So you got to just have that adrenaline, or as I call it, a drug, to enjoy truly what this job is.
Well, did you also go when you go on News Nation, are you live?
It depends. It has changed multiple times. I've done some live shots. I've not done some live shots. I've done as what I call look live. And what that is me standing in front of the camera, doing the same shot that I would if I was live, and piecing it together, as a look live, as a recorded package. So I've done more of that lately than I have done live shots. I think a big reason behind it is because News Nation airs a lot of their newscasts later, like 7 o'clock in the evening, is like their main prime time newscast. And as many stations, as many companies have, they don't like overtime. anymore. And if I stay till 7, at that point, it's pretty much overtime for the day. So I think there has been some changes in that as well, that they're trying to make sure that there's no crazy overtime on my schedule as well. So not so much live for News Nation. I don't even think I've been live this year so far. I know I was live in 2023 a handful of times, in 2022 and 2021, but I can't think of anything this year. Now, I could see something happening later this year if abortion does pass on the ballot later this year. But our legislative session was actually pretty calm. We haven't had, I'm knocking on wood so I don't jinx myself, that we haven't had anything nation newsworthy wide that would make me live yet on News Nation. But I'm sure it's coming later this year, especially with our elections.
How's it different, doing a story for a national outlet and local, what's the difference? Is there a difference?
I would say that unlike my stories that are airing in the state of Missouri, I'm more vague when it comes to the national story. So if something happened or the piece of legislation has to do, okay, for example, let's talk about the shooting at the Super Bowl rally this year. That was a big story when it came to statewide politics, because in the state of Missouri, there are no regulations with guns. You can be any age and own a gun in the state of Missouri. It doesn't matter if it's an AR-15. It doesn't matter if it's a pistol, if it's a rifle. You can own a gun in the state of Missouri at age 0. So it was a big question of how did these kids get these guns? And I had to do a couple of those pieces. And I would say that unlike my stories here in Missouri that are airing just in the corners of all the states, that when I was explaining those, I was like, oh, legislation passed last year, or there was conversation in the General Assembly last year that brought this topic to light, but nothing moved across the finish line. That's how I would air that story here in the state of Missouri. When the story aired nationally, I changed it up a little bit, because you have to be a little bit more specific, since those people watching it aren't always going to be from Missouri. So, you're saying like in the Super Bowl rally parade, there was a shooting that took the life of one DJ in Kansas, in Missouri. But the lawmakers in Missouri have previously not made any big movements on gun regulations within the past 2 decades. You try to try to be more specific, and I also say at the same time vague, because I wouldn't have to say Missouri lawmakers in my package that's airing here in Missouri. Obviously, I'm talking about Missouri lawmakers. Obviously, I'm not talking about, I could say the Republicans in the state of Missouri have been very against any gun regulations, but in my national package, I say the GOP party. I just feel like, I have to be more careful with some of my words, because I don't want to confuse a viewer. I want to make sure that the viewer knows the entire time on News Nation that they are watching a story that's about Missouri and how Missouri was involved, where I might say Missouri one time in a piece that airs here in Missouri, because I'm the Missouri Capitol Bureau reporter. And that's what my story is obviously going to be about, but they wouldn't know that in Chicago.
Yeah. And then also another thing is that you mentioned doing producing, and see, there are some people, I know there are a ton of production jobs in TV, it seems, but it seems like people want to be in front of the camera. So is it true that if you're on the producing track, it's hard to get in front of the camera?
No, I disagree with that. It's actually much easier to get in front of the camera. And the reason why is you understand the name of the game specifically. And how I mean by that is I remember being that morning producer, and at some points, your reporter is telling you, I'm not going to make slot. And you're like, okay, what can I do to help? And when that reporter didn't make slot, that reporter didn't make the time. And when I mean slot, I mean, it's 5:01 and that reporter's hitting at 5:01. And that reporter goes, I'm not going to make it. Your show kind of blows up a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
You, as a producer, have to be able to show, you have to keep going on the air. It's not like at 5:01, you get to say, well, we don't have anything to air at this time, take commercial. It doesn't work like that. You have to continue the show moving. So you have to be able to fly by the seat of your pants to be able to put something in its place until that reporter says, I'm ready, take the package. So, as a producer, how important it is to make slot. You know, as a producer, that you have to be short, sweet, and concise and to the point so you can get another story in. The more stories you get into a newscast, the more your boss is going to like you. So when that switches or transitions to a reporter, you know how important time management is. Number one, you can't do a package or you can't do a story that's over a minute 30 because that puts that producer between a rock and a hard place for another reporter. You also know how important it is to make deadline because the news is going on at 5, whether you're ready or not.
Mhm.
And I would also say that your writing skills are so much better because as a producer, you're writing, and I'm going to explain what a super is, but when you're watching TV, you see a bar, the news, you see a bar come across the bottom and it might say hot, hot here, hot temps here to stay. Okay, well, you only have so many characters to fit in that line. So you got to be, you know, short, sweet, to the point, and concise. So when you're writing as a producer, it's transitioned so well to a reporter because now I feel like you're able to write more concise and you're better able to understand how to tell your story. Also, as the producer, you're kind of the ringleader of the circus. You're the one telling the meteorologist how much time he's going to have. You're the one telling the sports guy you're going to have 3 minutes to tell your story. You're the one telling the reporter, I really only have a minute for you today. Could you work with a minute and getting your story in? And when you go out to the field, all of a sudden you're just focused on yourself and your story, honestly. And so it makes your day seem a little more like a breath of fresh air or a little bit more of, okay, I'm just in charge of me today. I can do this story. And so one of the harder things I think between switching between producer row and reporter is you do have to contact all the people to set your story up. You got to go out and come up with story ideas and be able to find that story idea that is super important or that people want to hear. I would say that that is the important spot, but the amount of times producers have gone to reporters that I know personally is a lot. And I'm so glad. I say this all the time. Even though I didn't necessarily want to be a producer at the beginning, I did do it as a student at Western when we did our student run newscast. And I enjoyed it there. But when I got out of college and I was like, what am I going to do? And this producer job was available. I was like, I think I can do that. And I learned so incredibly much about writing and about explaining stories to the viewers. And not only that, but think about it, going when there was a breaking news story in the mornings, which happened a lot. You had a lot of overnight shootings in St. Louis, overnight fires. I have like 30 seconds to relay to the anchor what's happening. So I hit the anchor button so she can hear me in my ear and I'm like, okay, this is what we know. And she's writing it down. And that goes back to that bullet point. We know that there was a shots fired on the 3600 block of Peacock, and we know that at this time police are still investigating. At this moment, we're asking people to still stay indoors, and at the same time, we do not know if there's any victims from this shooting, and that's all I can tell her before she has to go live. So I feel like that also keeps you in tune because you're back to those 5 bullet points just to get her on the air and to you to get that breaking news out ASAP. So, no, I highly recommend anybody that is thinking of being a producer that might be sitting on, or anybody that's thinking of being a reporter who's sitting on producer row right now, do it because you might be one of the better reporters at your shop because you know the ins and outs of how to put a broadcast on TV.
But what people were telling me is that it's hard to change tracks. You may want to change tracks, but the powers that be sort of slot you into that. Is that true?
I think it honestly, I could see where some people would say that because when these news directors do get producers, producers are so hard to come by. And so
Yes.
that these news directors don't want to lose you. I could totally see that. I would say, if any advice, first off, if you are thinking about it, number one, when you go into that boss's office, say like, my job, my idea of being in the broadcasting field was not to be a producer. It was to be a reporter. And make sure that that boss knows. 9 times out of 10, I have heard that a boss is going to give you a chance. I will also tell you, though, that I've been in some shops where a boss will make that producer stay an extra day, come in on their day off and go shoot a story. It might not air, but at least it can show what you can do.
Are they
I
paid for
also,
that? Are they paid for that?
yeah, most of the time
Good.
because they are,
Well, they should be. If they're not paid, then everybody, if you're not being paid for something, report it.
yeah,
Everybody
exactly.
should
No,
be
they're,
paid when you show up to work.
yeah, they're being paid for that. And so I have heard a lot of um, news directors do that. I know in my shop in St. Louis, we have had two people that are producers that are now being reporters on the weekends in order to work towards that everyday reporter. And they're both young. They're not fresh out of college, but just a couple of years out. And both of them are working on becoming full-time reporters. But when they came to the station, they took producing jobs and they had that conversation with my boss. And now they actually are on the air 3 days a week, producing the other 2 days with the intention of fully switching to a reporter in the coming months. And I think that they'll fully be able to do that. So I think number one is speaking your mind out first to your boss. Not only that, but don't be scared to do it. And if you like your station, I would also say you're in control. So if you tell your boss that you want to be a reporter and they say, well, sorry, I wanted you as a producer, I'd say, okay, well, there's another job. There's another job down the street, or there's another shop that'll take me. Because 9 times out of 10, reporters aren't going to be turned away because we need everything in the broadcasting field, everything in the journalism field almost at this point. There's just not enough people to fill the jobs. So I do highly recommend being a producer before a reporter. I've not known many people go the opposite way, reporter to producer. I don't know many of people that have done that, but I would say take control yourself and do it because it's something that helps you immensely in the reporting field.
But then do women have to look a certain way?
I would say that there are some, I don't want to say prerequisites because that's not the right word. For example, I have a consultant. I only have to meet with that consultant once a year. Um, People ask all the time, do you do your own hair and makeup? Yes. That doesn't happen down here. It's not done for me. Yes, your bigger cities, your Chicago, LA, New
Well,
York.
even
Yes,
here
it's
though, but I
happening.
talked to a makeup artist and they said even here they've cut back on that.
Really?
Yeah.
I did not know that. So no, what happens is, especially, and it's not only women when it comes to this consultant, men and women on TV alike, both meet with a consultant. That consultant goes through, I have to put my makeup on for this consultant. Then the consultant watches me, sees what it's all like. Then I take it off and she walks me through some stuff. When it comes to hair wise, there really aren't many restrictions, at least not that I've ever been around. Um, I do have to, if I chop my hair immensely, like let's say I decide to cut 12 inches off, it was really long, wanted to donate it. It does say in our contract that we do have to get that approved, which I understand. You can't color your hair something crazy either. That has to be approved. I'm trying to think of anything else. There are colors that the consultant recommends that we don't wear. Like I don't wear anything yellow because it does not look good on me, number one. But the consultant's like, it's gonna whiten you out or it'll blow out your color. And I'm like, okay, well, I don't even own anything yellow. So that works out well. I've never had a bad experience with a consultant. I've never had someone say, oh, you need to lose 5 pounds or, oh, luckily, I have heard horror stories, not so much nowadays, but years ago, I had a teacher that explained some horror stories that she went through. But I've never heard of horror stories of my friends that have gone through it now. And I think a lot of that has changed over the years because women are not afraid to speak out anymore. And I'm really glad because of it. So, because of that, I get to benefit from what previous women have done before me and speaking out and saying, this is not going to happen to me. I do have to put makeup on every day. I've never not put makeup on to go on TV. I'm sure I would get some pretty big trouble if I didn't do that. Not that I'm going to try it, but yeah, I've never had any problem with being told I look bad or lose 5 pounds or, nothing of my appearance that I've been told I need to change. I do truly wonder though, because, and it makes a lot of people wonder, I'm sure, when you're watching the news, you see these tiny anchors that are females you know, telling you the news. You don't see any overweight, obese women. And I do wonder if, if you walk into an office of a news director and you're a size 12 or a 14 instead of a size 4 or 6, do they kind of push you out?
Well, probably even
I would,
6 is too big. It's but they probably want 2 or something.
yeah. And I would say that, not that I want to become an anchor. I really don't have that desire to sit and read the news. I've always wanted to be a reporter. But I do wonder, since I'm not a size 2 or a 4, would I even be considered for a job like that? That thought crosses my mind. And I hate that that's something that in this field that we all think about. But luckily, I've never had any bad moments with a consultant or telling me, don't wear this, you look fat in this, or I've luckily never had that. And I hope and pray to God that I never had that. Now, viewers can be mean. I call them trolls. But it is what it is. It's not uncommon for me to get an email or something just brutal. I'll never forget. There was a shirt that I wanted so bad. This was my first reporting job on air in Southern Illinois, and I wanted this polo Ralph Lauren button-up flower shirt. I wanted it so bad, and I saved my money up for it so I could buy it. And it went on sale, and I wore it on TV. And some viewer sent me an email, not only me, but the whole newsroom, and said, "Since when do you allow your reporters to wear pajamas? Emily looked like she just rolled out of bed."
Wow.
And I was so heartbroken, but you just got to learn to live with what the trolls say. But yeah, I wanted that shirt so bad. I'll never forget that. So that's my one clothing story I think of all the
Well, it's
time.
also because when you have moving images in front of people, they're going to objectify whatever's in front of them. They're just going to
Pretty
analyze it.
much.
They're going to criticize it. So, and
Yeah.
it's impersonal. They would never say that to you in front of your face, to your face.
Yeah. And that's why I call them trolls. They're like the ones that, I'm going to hide behind my keyboard or my phone and I'm going to post this. I'm going to send this to you. And so be it.
Well, it seems like at the national level, though, it does seem like it matters what you look like, whether you're a reporter or anchor.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. I think that that matters a heck of a lot more at the national level. And, you know, part of me is frustrated with that a little bit because, we hear how all the time social media is getting in the minds of our younger generations and telling them how they have to look and how they have to dress and how they have to be present in public. And I think when we just show the thin anchors, it doesn't always help
Yeah, but
when
it's
it
been like
comes to
that for
that.
so long. It's been like that for
Yeah,
so long.
it has been.
Now, with another thing is, so you talked a lot about your experience, but can you just let me know, like, how did you actually get into the business and make it? Because a lot of people want to get into it. Okay, there is a need. There's definitely a need. But at the same time, like, so I'm in Chicago. Somebody was telling me in another interview that for one position, on air position, they get 5,000 applications.
Oh my gosh, that's crazy.
So yeah.
How I got into it, I'm not gonna bore you with the whole story because it starts all the way in fourth grade. But we did a meteorology unit in like fourth grade. And my parents always grew up watching the news. I remember my mom getting dinner ready with the CBS Evening News with like Morley Schaefer always on it. And we never missed the CBS Evening News. And then after the CBS Evening News was 5:30, we automatically watched the 6 o'clock newscast at our house. And then as I got older, I was allowed to stay up later. I'd watch the 10 o'clock news with my mom. So that my parents were always in the know. My parents got newspapers delivered to the house. And so I would say that that played a big role in it, having it on all the time. They also had in St. Louis, you might have heard of KMOX. Um, every morning waking up, we listened to KMOX. I actually knew when I had to be brushing my teeth because sports came on at 7:45 a.m. and they had a tone for sports. So I knew I had to be in the bathroom brushing my teeth at that time. So we were a very in the know family, even though neither one of my parents are in the business whatsoever. And I would say that it started there. Then we did a meteorology unit in fourth grade, and we had to really watch a meteorologist for a a night or something and write a short story about it, something along those lines. And it was after that that I'm like, that's what I want to do for a living. I want to be a meteorologist. And I would use the mirrors that were in my room. I had mirror closet doors and write with Expo marker. And my mom has videos and pictures of me pointing to like the weather on my mirror that I was using and writing my Expo markers, telling the mirror that tomorrow it was going to be 50 degrees, something along those lines. So it started in fourth grade and wanted to be a meteorologist until I got to high school. Then, if you were to ask me, I got really involved in sports. I played a lot of sports myself. I enjoyed sporting events in general. So that I wanted to become the sports broadcaster. You know, at that time, you saw Aaron Andrews, you wanted to be Aaron Andrews. So throughout all of high school, I would say that I wanted to be still in TV, but just on the sports side of things. Then we got to college, and I found out everybody going into broadcasting and
Yep.
journalism wants to be in sports.
Yeah, and radio too. Everybody.
Everybody. And I was like, yeah, this I can't do this. I can't do sports. And I went to a meeting within the broadcast and journalism department. It was kind of like how to get involved. And they were saying that they needed somebody to get involved in the newscast, and they needed a reporter for city council. And I was like, well, I guess I could learn about city council if somebody helps me. So I got paired with a senior at the time, and I would go to city council every Monday night in Macomb, Illinois, and started really enjoying it then. And from there, it just kind of took off. My sophomore year, I was a producer. Then I started anchoring. Then I became the reporter. Then I did some meteorology. I did it all kind of in college. I even took radio shifts. I worked for the public radio station in Macomb. I was the student reporter at Tri-States Public Radio my junior and senior years. Um, and I was on the student run station, which is just a music station, 88.3 The Dog, and just tried to take it all in, honestly, because I figured, and people told me that if you try it in college, you don't have to worry about getting fired for it or,
No.
you know, jumping job to job to job when you get done. So I really did end up loving TV the most and knew that it was something I was going to do. I will admit that when I was going to college and I told my parents I was going to go into broadcasting, my dad was not a fan. My dad's like, that's not a career. And I was like, yes, it is. And he's like, Emily, that's not a career. And I'm like, you watch news all the time. He's like, it's not a sustainable career. And so now I think it's so funny. He gets to watch me on TV every night. And he admits it now that what he said was wrong. But did 4 years of college and did everything under the sun. And then after those 4 years at Western, I went to the public affairs reporting program at UIS and got to continue in TV reporting with an internship. And pretty much after that, just got to try to jump in wherever I could. I did a couple internships while I was in college, so that helped a ton. One of them being at KMOV in St. Louis. And I would say that it's because of that internship and what I did as an intern that allowed me to go be a producer there right out of school. So that helped a lot. So I would also say I kept a lot of my options open. Yes, I knew I wanted to be a reporter, but if I didn't get that reporter job immediately, I wasn't going to be upset with myself because I had had that chance as a producer. I have had that chance as being behind the scenes. And if that meant that that's how I was going to learn my first job, great, I was going to do it. I knew that reporter was definitely the ultimate goal for me. But if that wasn't my first job, I was going to build up to it. So there was that producer job opening, and I applied, didn't expect to get it in St. Louis only because I did just graduate college, but I applied, and the next day, one of the managers called me and said, "Did you put an application in?" I said, "Yeah, that's me." And they said, "Yeah, this is perfect. Can you start next week?" And they said, "We saw you during your internship. We're okay."
Wow.
And that's pretty much how it all worked. I got my first job. So even though it wasn't a reporting job, it was still something that I was interested in just because it was in the field. And I felt like, you know, and I was a reporter at that time. I was a producer at that time that was still doing some reporting on the sides. I would ask if I could go shoot a story with a photographer if there was a down day, because I wanted to make sure my reel was most up to date. And KMOV knew that I wanted to be a reporter. I said that to them in my interview, and they were the ones that said, "We really don't take reporters right out of college. You need to go to a different market and make your mistakes. And I get it. I totally get it. And I'm glad that I did it. I'm glad that I went to Southern Illinois and had that chance. And I would say that made a big difference. So how I got my foot in the door was I didn't set my mind to a one set track where I had to be a reporter. I was willing to do those odd and end jobs just so I could get into the actual industry. And I figured from there I would be able to work my way up somehow, some way, and get to that reporter job that I really wanted.
Now, why did you bother getting a master's?
Because it has always been a goal of mine to actually teach. This is something that I wanted to do before I had the opportunity to even teach. So I did the master program to go back and hopefully teach college. I loved my college professors so much in journalism and broadcasting. And what I loved about them the most is I never had a book. It was always hands on. And I think that's huge in this industry. We never were reading from a book. We never were doing any of that stuff. It was all about, well, we're going to go out and teach you how to use a camera today. Well, you're going to go out and shoot this story and turn it. You're going to write a story for me and I'm going to critique and edit. So I would say that that was a big part of it. And I always thought, you know, if the reporting field burns me out eventually, because that can happen a lot of times, I want something to fall back on in this field. So that's when I decided I wanted to go get my master's degree. And it's always kind of been in the back of my head that I wanted my master's degree in whatever I wanted to go into. So I did it specifically for teaching. But it actually ended up helping me more in what I'm doing now because I spent that year at the Capitol in Illinois learning all of the ins and outs of politics, which helped me and led me to this job, getting my job today. Actually, my first job, something that you never really hear about at my first reporting job at WSIL, my boss actually said that he gave me a little bit higher pay than the other reporters because of my master's degree, which is shocking because you don't really hear how a master's degree helps out. And I will say that that station when I started was family owned. So a little bit different scenario. You don't have much of those anymore. It was family owned and then they got bought out by a big company. So I think the master's degree was truly just because I wanted to go back and teach eventually at some point in my life. And it just happened a little bit sooner. And I eventually do plan to go back and teach at some point.
That's
Yeah.
great. Yeah, that's good. I mean, some people do stay in reporting for several years. So I think also, I mean, people have told me, you know, privately that they have PTSD.
Yeah.
I mean, so it
Yeah.
depends what you're covering. If you're covering a bunch of shootings and so forth.
Yeah. I am glad. And when I speak to classes, college classes now, they always ask how I create that work-life balance. I said, you know, when I was a general assignment reporter, I got a dog. And I got a dog because I needed that dog at the end of the day. I needed that walk at the end of the day. So that shooting or that kid that was killed in a horrific fire, all of that was, I could get that out of my mind. I also really love to run. So that also played a big role in it. But now I don't feel like I have PTSD yet. I'm not annoyed with the politicians yet. Don't know if it's coming. Hopefully it doesn't, but that's what I always say. The day that I get annoyed with them, I guess, is the day for me to try something new out.
Well, also it's politics. They're not, you know, it's not physical. It's mental. I mean, they're arguing points and they're trying to get things passed and they're, you know, forming alliances and so forth. So that doesn't sound violent.
If anything, they make me feel normal. I call them the crazy ones.
Yeah, it's
When
hard.
they're screaming at each other over these certain
Yeah.
topics, I'm like, oh yeah, that makes me normal. I'm the normal one in this.
Well, there's a lot at stake on different levels. So I'm sure Missouri is very interesting to cover. So,
I will say it's never boring. Let's say that.
well, plus there's such a long history there. I mean, it used to be the frontier. So it's got all
Yeah.
these traditions.
And we have one of the largest House of Representatives in the country with 163 members. But then you look at our Senate with just 34 members. So it's crazy. And I am very excited about this election year.
Mhm.
It sounds weird coming from a reporter, but I'm like very excited. I have my notes ready to go. And we haven't had our primary yet. Our primary isn't until August. So we have a really late primary. And, we have 4 Republicans running for governor, and all of them have huge campaign funds and are pretty known throughout the state. So our August election is almost more important. I hate to say that in Missouri. Our August election, maybe not important is the maybe important isn't the right word, but is almost more showtime, big neon lights, big deal than our November election this year, because we know how a lot of our seats are going to fall, since this is such a red state that we live in. And so I would say that our November or August primary is going to be, I'm already looking forward to it. And I have like 6 weeks to go.
Yeah, I know what you're saying, because sometimes when I hear about contentious elections, like, even I live in this ward in Chicago, and they spent millions to become aldermen here. It's sort of
that,
interesting as an
that's
observer.
crazy. That's crazy. I was
Well,
telling
not
my
millions,
husband,
but a lot, 7 figures for sure.
yeah, I told my husband I'm amazed how much money is spent in these races. I was like, if you didn't use it on politics, what would you do with that money?
Right.
How could you change the world? Because there's a lot of money in the races in Missouri this year.
Wow, that's interesting. I didn't know. I don't know much about Missouri. I mean, I've been there a couple times, but I didn't know about the ins and outs. But what is Southern Illinois like? I don't think I've ever been that far south.
Southern Illinois is, and not that I'm trying to cause politics in this interview, is almost, it's like 2 different states a little bit.
Yeah.
Honestly, Southern Illinois, and what's so interesting is when you do go down to Southern Illinois, and there were a couple politics that, local politics, I should say, that I covered, whether it be city council, county council, whatever it may be. They truly do hate the northern part of the state and don't understand that, without Chicago, they couldn't be a state, but it's neither here nor there. And it's just a different world down there. People love their guns. I would compare Southern Illinois to Missouri. It's that much alike, where it's almost crazy how different the top of the state can be from the bottom of the state. So, when I was down there, I covered a Trump rally. I covered 2 Trump rallies, actually, one in Indiana, and Trump did come to Missouri that year. So I covered 2 Trump rallies in 2020, or leading up to the 2020 election. I'm just trying to think here, keeping all my ears straight. And so covering those, you just have people come out in swarms, and it's crazy. And down in Illinois, it's a true red piece of the state. So I would just say that it's so different from
But
the
also not as
northern
it's not
part of
as
the state.
but it's also is not as population dense as up here.
Oh, very true. Very true. There are not really any big cities. I mean, I guess you could consider Carbondale and Marion, but they're no Springfield, they're no Effingham, they're no Bloomington, they're anything north of that. They're small. So I would say that they're these kind of tight knit communities that are very red, and it makes for an interesting way to report, for sure, especially when it comes to state politics, because you do have this vast difference between how the northern part of the state thinks and functions compared to the southern part of the state. So yeah, I that's how I would describe it. Very different from, being in Springfield, or, you know, even visiting my in-laws that live on the Wisconsin Illinois border.
Yeah. No, even when I go to Central Illinois, it seems very different for me. For me, I mean, I've been to Kentucky, but I don't think I've ever been to Southern. But well, that's what makes our country great. I mean, it's all the diversity. I mean, I
Oh
know that I know
yeah,
this sounds cliche, but it's sort of cool that people in the same state think so differently from each other. So it's sort of
it's crazy.
refreshing.
Missouri, it's not, Missouri has half the population that the state of Illinois does. And so being in Illinois, it's crazy that they're that different. And here in Missouri, yeah, you have Kansas City and St. Louis that might be a little bit different than how the rest of the state is. But for the most part, it's one state. Illinois is totally different and takes
Yeah.
you like a run for your money, which is so interesting, and a good reason to love democracy as a whole, because I think that makes us the United States, and we aren't being told how we have to live, work, and believe.
Yeah, that's another thing. And speaking of that, because a lot of people use social media to express their thoughts. How has social media affected your job?
Ooh, good question. Social media as a whole, first off, I will say that before I bash on social media, I should say how much I use social media in my job daily to help me with stories, to help me find important things of the day. You know, lawmakers tweet all the time, or they're on Facebook all the time, and politicians are constantly posting updates or what they're mad about or what they need to know. And then you see that Missourians get involved and they correspond with them. And so I do use it a lot actually to help me with my daily ins and outs of my job. But when it comes to social media, you have to know your own starting and stopping point. And what I mean by that is I still use Twitter all the time. And the reason I do is because we have a hashtag in Missouri, hashtag MoLeg. Um, that is huge. And even though Twitter has gone through some ups and downs and different changes over the past year, the amount of people that still interact with MoLeg is enough that I feel like it's my job to continue. It's not uncommon for me to post and tweet daily about what's going on in the legislature, the bill that's coming up, what bill they're debating at the moment, if it passed, if it's headed to the governor's desk, X, Y, and Z. And yeah, people are responding on Twitter or they're retweeting. So it's still used pretty widely here in Missouri, I feel like, when it comes to politics, more so than Facebook. And so for now, I'm going to keep using it,
I
but
like
I
Twitter.
am,
I like
yeah,
Twitter
I like Twitter a lot
because
too.
there's so many ways. It's so open. There are so many ways you can use it. I use it for educational and language reasons and just to see different points of view than what's
Yeah,
around me.
I love Twitter. I love Twitter
And
more than Facebook and
I like
anything
Twitter also
else.
because recently I put a link on Facebook, a link to my blog, which is about language basically, and they blocked it and they said this violates community guidelines. And I thought this is ridiculous. I didn't say anything. And then but on Twitter I can put the same blog link and it won't say that.
That's
There's more
weird.
common sense or something. Yeah, it's strange.
Yeah. So I would say that I still use social media a decent amount. I do draw the line. If somebody comments something nasty back or tries to get in a fight, I do not respond. But if somebody has a question about a piece of legislation, like, oh, when would this go into effect? Or how would this change what's in current state statute? I'm going to respond to them and interact with them because they're truly just asking for more information. Um, Social media, I feel like when I first started my job, I used Facebook a ton. My public Facebook page, I was posting stories there every single day. I was doing Facebook lives. I was doing all of that. I can't tell you the last time I've done a Facebook live, or even really posted my stories. I post pictures of my dog mostly now on my public Facebook page, and that seems to get more likes than me posting a story. So I feel like Facebook is just kind of there. My Twitter is still very much how I interact with people. And then I try to sprinkle in Instagram every once in a while. I haven't gotten into TikTok. I haven't gotten into threads off of Instagram. Um, and I do say that on the weekends, you'll find me not scrolling on social media at all. I try to make my weekends away from social media because it just becomes a lot. It's overwhelming and can be overbearing. And maybe on Sunday nights when I'm like sitting down to watch the news, I'll scroll through my Instagram or my Facebook and stuff like that. But social media, I still find is a really important part of this job. And when I do go talk to these college classrooms and even some high schoolers that I go speak with, I always ask them what their favorite social media is. And this year, this past spring, I probably spoke to 8 classes. Um, all over Missouri and some parts of Illinois. And I would say that a majority of them say they use Snapchat still. And I'm like, really? And they're like, yeah, that's what they're using. And I said, okay, well, I don't use Snapchat for news because that would be really hard. I said, what about news? And they said that they use TikTok or Instagram. And I always like to pick their brain since they're the ones they're the hardest ones to get to watch the news or listen to the news or read the news. Um, and I don't think I'll ever give in on TikTok. I can't imagine being an MMJ and making a video every day. So I don't think I'm going to give into that one. But social media is still a really big part of what I do day in and day out. And I would say that 90% of my story ideas come from what I see on Twitter and what I see politicians post. So I can't imagine not having social media involved somehow in my daily life, which is really sad to say.
Yeah. Oh, you mentioned MMJ. I think one of the reasons also why people are turned off by working as a reporter is because they have no photog with them. They have to do everything. And that's sort of it's a combination of stressful and maybe a safety risk. I've never done it, so.
Yeah, I will say that it it makes the job harder. If I was a general assignment reporter, meaning going in and day out, doing my story on the streets and stuff like that, I would for sure not be an MMJ. This job is a little bit different because I work so much in the Capitol. Everything is in like the building or the Supreme Court right across the street or the Office of Administration in the other building across the street. So I'm pretty confined, which is nice.
Yeah.
In the summer, I'm a little bit more open. I go shoot a lot of my own stories, but I think that I have such a good balance that I'm not mad about it. If I was a general assignment reporter, absolutely not. I will say that my stations in St. Louis and Kansas City, because of safety reasons, they do not allow reporters to go out by themselves because of where we are today. And I'm glad that my company looks at it that way. Springfield and Joplin, it kind of depends. They are smaller shops, so it makes it a little bit harder. But especially St. Louis and Kansas City, those reporters are not allowed out of the building without a photographer. Or if one of them shoots their own little story, maybe an interview, after they're done with that interview, there's a photographer waiting for them to be with them the rest of the day. And I'm really glad that they view it that way. I go live in the Capitol every day. My office is inside the Capitol building itself. They built a studio for me. So I don't have to worry about being out when I go live. I just close my office door and that's it. So it's a little bit different for me. And I will admit, I will sadly admit that I'm a control freak.
Yeah.
So I don't mind being an MMJ because I know the video I want. I know how I'm going to write to it. And I know exactly where that video is at when I put a story together. But like I said, if I was a general assignment reporter, I would absolutely put my foot down and say, I'm not being an MMJ. No way, Jose. But because I have this one specialty where all my stuff is 90% in the same building, I don't see a need to have a photographer. And I am totally okay with that.
Now, what about what advice do you have for putting a story together? I mean, when you have several minutes of tape or whatever.
Oh, yeah. I would say, you know, I feel first off, something that I do, I keep a notebook and because I'm watching I'm actually going to pull it out. It's right here, for example. It might be a little backwards in this, but when I am recording like today, I had a hearing that I was recording. I put in the timestamps in my notebook and I star them of the important sound bites that I think I need to use. And this helps me really edit a story really quickly because I know that at 34 or at 35:05, those were really good sound bites. So I constantly am making timestamps when I'm covering something in my notebook. I think it's also important not to record. I totally remember doing this as a young journalist. I would record a whole city council meeting because I didn't know what exactly to cover. Now I feel like I'm like, okay, when they bring up this, I don't need that. Or they talk about, I don't need that. So I've definitely become, and I think that's something that we all learn as a journalist, as veterans, we all kind of pick up what we need and what we don't need. And I would say that that's something really big that helps out a ton. So, even though there is a lot of clips that are involved, I think today, for example, I had a hearing and there were a ton of speakers. I think I ended up with like 32 clips, which is a lot to put a story together. But because I starred what those time cues were, it helped me out a lot. And at the end of the day, yes, when you go into an interview and you do an interview for 20 minutes, but you only need the sound for like 30 seconds, which is really frustrating as a journalist as well. But you just use those most important sound bites. And I always say that the sound bites that are the best are the personal opinion sound bites from somebody. You tell the facts, let them tell the story. And I always listen to big words like, oh, this is a disaster. Today, for example, the state of Missouri is down immensely in enrollment for higher education. Okay, well, I'm going to let that guy explain, who's in head of the Department of Higher Education in Missouri, explain why. I can say that they're down by X number of students, but let him be the one that's saying, since we haven't bounced back from the pandemic, and I think this is becoming the new norm. That's a great soundbite, and so I would say that I definitely try to listen. And I feel like this is something that as a new journalist, you have to find out on your own. Like, this is something that takes a while. You eventually hear the words that make your ears perk up and you're like, yes, that's the soundbite, or yeah, I want that one. But I wasn't like that at the beginning. But I would say that I highly recommend that if you are covering something that goes on for an hour, or a press conference by any means, take your notebook and mark those time cues down that are something important. It'll help you edit, number one, faster, and you won't have to transcribe as much because you already have an idea of how you're going to write your story.
Yeah, and also for audio and audio programs, you can also mark, set markers. But I don't know if you just do audio only sometimes.
I mostly don't do audio only. Mine's always audio and video, but I do have those markers on my camera as well. I can push a button and it throws up color bars.
Oh,
And you can do that as well. I know a lot of reporters that I work with that do the color bars. I call myself a weirdo. I'm still the one that carries a notebook with me everywhere. And I keep all my notebooks. I have notebooks from college of me being a reporter. And I'm like, I wonder what I'm going to do with those one day. No idea, but I keep them.
well, another thing is, you sound very busy, but you're also, what do you do for the INBA?
I am the vice president for the Illinois News Broadcasters Association. And I like to say that
Yeah,
that
we
is the
buried the
job.
lead. We waited like over an hour to talk about this, but go ahead.
That's okay. Uh, Hopefully it was the cliffhanger that kept people going. I my job as the vice president is honestly the conventions, and the student awards. So we have two conventions a year, and pretty much making sure that those go off without a hitch, are super important. We just had our spring one not too long ago, and that was in the Quad Cities. We have another convention coming up this fall in Peoria, and then I believe next spring we'll be back in Springfield, or I'm sorry, we'll be in Bloomington again. So we move all across the state, which I love. But this is the job that deals with the contracts and the hotels and the food and the catering and the awards and the ins and outs. You see the president, and I'm glad that Rachel's got that front and center, because I feel like I'm the person kind of behind the scenes making all the phone calls, which is great. Emails and phone calls I can live with. So I love this organization, Illinois News Broadcasters Association. I got to know it in college. We had our own. I'm trying to think, our own order, or our own organization. That's the word I was looking for. At Western Illinois University, we had a really great advisor, Jasmine Crichton, and she helped us, and she took us to all the conventions, and we competed in the student awards. And I just found so many benefits from being an INBA member, whether that be the networking, whether that be learning from the other great professionals we have within the program. And so when I became a reporter in Illinois, I knew outside of school, I knew that I wanted to stay with it. Well, when I took this job in mid Missouri, I was nervous that I was going to have to drop the program or drop the organization because I'm in mid Missouri. But because my main station is St. Louis, which covers Illinois, my stories air in Illinois all the time. It's where my family lives. They watch me every night. I still get to be part of the organization. So I was very honored when I got nominated to be the vice president. And it takes a lot of work, but good work, good hard work in the long run that pays off for an organization that truly helps journalists. And I would say that a personal goal, if you had to ask me for our organization, is getting these younger journalists involved, because it really can help them in the long run, and it helps them move up in their career and become better journalists.
So that's why they should join.
Absolutely. They should join and come to our conventions. We try to make them fun and exciting. The fall is normally, I shouldn't say normally, it is our professional awards, and the spring is the student awards. But both conventions are meant for professionals and students alike, with critique sessions, with our sessions in general, and always our fun awards ceremonies on Saturday night. And it's just a great time to all be around each other and meet with journalists from literally all corners and parts of
Mhm.
the state of Illinois.
Yeah. And anything else?
I can't think of anything. Thank you for taking the time to do this. I appreciate all your hard work that you put into these podcasts. Honestly,
Oh,
Margaret, thank you.
yeah, thanks. And